Hello and welcome to the world of stories. I'm sure you're here for a bedtime story to help you drift into sleep. And so, let's begin. There once was a woman who was so poor that she couldn't afford to buy her daughter, Karen, any shoes. The woman often wept to see Karen's feet all rough and blistered. She would have been overjoyed to know that the shoemaker's wife felt so sorry for Karen that she was making her a pair of red shoes from some of her husband's leftover leather. But the woman never found out. She died the very day that the red shoes were finished, and Karen wore them for the first time as she walked behind her mother's coffin on the way to the church. The shoemaker's wife couldn't sew very well, and the shoes had turned out to be rather clumsy and misshapen. But Karen thought that her soft red shoes were the most wonderful things in all the world. However, the old lady who kindly took Karen in said, "You can't possibly go walking around in those odd things. Whatever will people think?" She threw the red shoes onto the fire and bought Karen a pair of sensible, sturdy black ones. It was the sensible, sturdy black shoes that Karen was wearing when the old lady took her to the palace to see the parade for the little princess's birthday. The king and queen stood with the little princess on the balcony, waving and smiling. But Karen didn't look at the gracious expressions on their faces, or their fine rich robes. Karen couldn't take her eyes off the red shoes on the little princess's feet. They were magnificent, made out of satin instead of leather, so they actually shone like rubies. Those really are the most wonderful things in all the world, thought Karen. From that moment, whenever Karen buckled on her sensible black shoes, she thought of the little princess's beautiful red ones. Whenever Karen took off her sensible black shoes, she thought of the princess's beautiful red ones, and she longed for those beautiful red shoes with all her heart. One day, the old lady who looked after Karen looked at her sensible black shoes and tutted, My, those are looking rather old and shabby, and they are too small for you now. We can't have you going along to the church in those tomorrow." The old lady handed her a purse full of money. "Buy yourself some new ones," she smiled. Karen walked all the way to the shoe store with a thumping heart. First, she tried on some sensible, sturdy black shoes, but there were none to fit her. Then she tried on some smart, laced-up brown shoes, but they still either slopped down or cramped her toes. Then Karen peered up at a high shelf and saw a red pair exactly like the ones the little princess had worn. They fitted her perfectly. Karen held her breath as she handed over her money and stepped out of the shop. Her feet gleamed and twinkled in the sunlight. She could hardly believe it. Her dream had come true. Karen knew full well that the old lady wouldn't approve at all of her choice, but luckily for her, the old lady's eyesight wasn't what it was, and the color of Karen's new shoes was just a dark blur. So she kept quiet, saying nothing of the truth. Next day, Karen's heart nearly burst with excitement as she slipped on her new red shoes. She tripped gaily all the way to the church, and even though it was a beautiful day and there were many finely dressed people about, she had eyes for no one and nothing except the red shoes. She twisted and turned as she walked, so her toes and heels shone in turn. She hoped that everyone would see them. Even when Karen was sitting in her church pew, she couldn't take her eyes off her red shoes. Even when the priest was praying, she couldn't take her eyes off of her red shoes. Even when the organist began to strike a joyful hymn of praises, she couldn't take her eyes off the red shoes. The statues of the angels and saints seemed to frown down sternly upon her, but Karen didn't notice. She still couldn't take her eyes off the red shoes. As the choir started to sing out and their voices filled the air, Karen felt a strange sensation in her feet. Her toes began to twitch inside the red satin. Her heels began to quiver to and fro. Suddenly, Karen's feet began to dance, right there and then in church. Karen's red shoes forced her to stand up and leap and turn and skip. With the eyes of the whole congregation staring at her, Karen's red shoes danced her down the aisle and out into the sunlight. "Help me!" she cried, but no one knew what to do. The red shoes danced Karen all around the graveyard and out of the church gate. Then they danced her around and around the churchyard and off down the street. By day and by night, the enchanted red shoes carried Karen along, twinkling wickedly. They danced her in and out of houses and up down the stairs. They danced her right through the city gates, across the fields, and into the dark forests. They danced her out of the trees and through the meadows, until Karen had quite forgotten how long she had been dancing. And still, they made Karen dance. "Forgive me," the sobbing girl cried out. "Forgive me for thinking of these foolish, pretty things above everything else." At last, the red shoes were still. Utterly exhausted, Karen collapsed into a heap and closed her eyes. And when her soul reached heaven, she never had to dance or think about red shoes ever again. That's it for tonight. Thank you for listening. Have a great night. Please like and subscribe if you like my contents. I shall update daily and continue with my best efforts. Good night.